Good morning everybody, my name is Schoeman. Welcome to Namibia and andBeyond Sossusvlei Desert Lodge. I wanted to chat to you this morning a little bit about star photography. Namibia and andBeyond Sossusvlei Desert Lodge is a great destination for star photography. We've got very dark night skies, very little ambient light. Just to put it into perspective, our closest town is about 150 kilometers away from us. So beautiful black, dark night skies. To make your star photography easier, there are a number of bits of equipment that you will need. One of the first things that you'd need is a nice sturdy tripod, because we're going to be shooting on long exposures. You want a nice sturdy platform from which to work off. It's also quite helpful if you have a nice fluid ball head attached onto the tripod. This way you can change your composition, you can change the angle of the camera quite easily without having to move the entire tripod. Because we're photographing at night, it's always a good idea to have a nice strong torch with you to see where you're going, to help you with your camera gear setup, or even perhaps a headlamp that you can take along. I always like to take a spare battery with me, just in case you run out of battery life, so extra battery is always a good idea. I always like to take along a cable release. This screws into the camera and I can trigger the camera without actually touching the camera. So you want to have the camera as still as possible, so a cable release or some kind of triggering mechanism will just make it easier for you to take your star pictures. There are lots of great cameras on the market, and I'm a Nikon user. I shoot with a D800 camera, and I've got two lenses to go with the camera. I've got a Nikon 2470 f2.8 lens, and I also have a Tokina 16-28 f2.8 lens. So it's always ideal for your star photography to use a nice fast lens, so anything with an aperture of 2.8 or less. You can use other lenses, but then sometimes your exposure is a little bit darker than what you'd like it to be. Personally, for my star images, I like to have a nice strong foreground subject that I focus on with the stars in the background. So maybe a nice mountain, or in this area there are some perfect quiver trees that you can do that. And just behind the lodge, just behind the hill over there, there's a wonderful quiver tree that I'm going to use this evening. That's going to be my anchoring point of my star image. So some of the starting settings that I have for my star photography as follows. I'll switch the camera into manual mode. I will use an ISO of 3200. I'll set the aperture on 2.8, and then generally I'll have a starting shutter speed of around 30 seconds. So normally this is a good base to start from, and then you can always make slight changes from there depending on the darkness of the night sky. So I'm up on the mountainside behind the lodge, and this is the beautiful quiver tree that I'm going to be using later on this evening as the foreground of our star photography image. So in terms of focusing, there are a couple of different ways in which you can achieve focus at night. One way is you can get there before the sun sets, and you can actually focus on the subject that you want and then wait until it gets sufficiently dark to take your image. Another way to get the focus is if you arrive at your subject after dark and you've got a nice strong torch. So use the torch light to set up the camera and get a nice composition, and then by shining on the subject with the torch you can then adjust the camera accordingly, and then you could use your autofocus to focus on your main subject. Alternatively, another way in which you can achieve focus, and you can manually adjust your focus to the infinity sign. So some lenses will be exactly on the infinity, you'll have to go slightly beyond or perhaps slightly back, and in that way you can also achieve focus. I've taken a variety of different images of the quiver tree. I've got in a little bit closer, I've walked back a couple of meters, did a couple of images that are slightly wider. I tried some of the images with an auto white balance, and then I did a couple of images on a cloudy white balance. So let's head back home, download them on the computer, and then have a look and see what they look like. Okay, so these are the images that we've just taken, and I can quickly run through them. So this was the first image that I took just as a tester on ISO 3200, 30-second exposure on aperture 2.8, and then I changed the ISO to 4000, so the results were a little bit brighter, so that's why I chose to stick with ISO 4000. As I said to you, I tried a couple of different angles, so those were the tester images, and then what I did is I moved the camera quite a bit closer, so got in slightly below the quiver tree with a wider angle, also 30-second exposure, aperture 2.8, and an ISO of 4000. And then this specific image was shot using a auto white balance, and then I changed the white balance to cloudy, and as you can see the difference between the two, so the cloudy white balance makes the image a lot warmer versus the auto white balance, which is a little bit cooler. I am shooting the images in RAW, so I can change these images in the editing, but you know, just to have a bit of fun and to experiment while I'm doing the star photography, I'm making the adjustments in camera as opposed to later on during the editing. Okay, and then after going in a little bit closer with the camera, I moved back a couple of meters, so a little bit more sky in there, the trees slightly smaller than in the previous image, and I left the camera in auto white balance cloudy, and you can see the image is slightly warmer and a little bit more yellow, and then I switched the camera into a auto white balance. So my settings were the same, ISO 4000, 30-second exposure on an aperture of 2.8. Okay, so now I've tried a couple of different options. I've gone a little bit closer to the quiver tree, I've moved away from the quiver tree, I've tried a auto white balance and then a cloudy white balance, and then the last thing I did is I tried a little bit of painting of light. So I've got a little headlamp, and during the exposure on the camera I take the headlamp and I paint the quiver tree. So this was the first attempt, not too bad, not quite enough light on the quiver tree. Then this was the second attempt, which was a little bit better for me, a little bit more light on the quiver tree, and this is in an auto white balance. And then the final image that I did is in a cloudy white balance, and then a little bit more painting on the tree. So in terms of painting with light, probably this was the best result, but my personal favorite of the evening is this image. So an auto white balance and a little bit of painting with light on the quiver tree. I'm going to take this favorite image of mine from last night, and I'm going to just jump through into the develop module on Lightroom, and as you can see there's a couple of basic edits that have been done. So I've got a preset, so I've developed a little user preset which I call Andrew Basic Develop. So this is, you know, tweaking a little bit of the highlights, a little bit of the whites, add a little bit of vibrance and saturation, so just to make the image pop just a little bit more. I'm going to punch up the whites a little bit, and it brings out the sky quite nicely, and I might just push up the vibrance a little bit more. You could perhaps work on individual colors and push up the saturation on the oranges just a touch. The idea for me is just to enhance the image just a little bit, not to over process. So if I can toggle between a before, so that's the image before without any editing, and then a after, and for me that looks quite nice. It's not over edited. The exposure
jumps out a little bit more, colors are slightly more saturated. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the final end result.